Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Monday, December 29th. We remain in the wake of yesterday's meeting at Lago between the acting president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, and U.S. President Donald Trump. Not a lot has been released in terms of details, in terms of what was discussed on ending the NATO proxy war against Russia on Ukrainian soil, which is really what that is. Perhaps the most important development, as the lead of today's Executive Intelligence Review Daily Alert notes, the most important development was the fact that right before Trump met with Zelensky, he had a phone call with President Putin of Russia. The Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, who handles foreign affairs matters, said that the conversation was friendly and noted that the two presidents share a broadly similar view that the temporary ceasefire proposed by Ukraine and Europe would merely prolong the conflict, which is important because that means that Trump is hearing the Russians on that matter. Well, I'll come to that in a moment, that Trump did acknowledge that. Now, on his way to the meeting, Zelensky, working on behalf of the British geopolitical crowd in Europe masquerading as leaders, Zelensky, as well as the other elements of the Commonwealth, Zelensky made a stop off in Canada to meet with the former head of the Bank of England, that is Mark Carney, the current prime minister there. And as you can expect, what was discussed, it was how to torpedo and slow down the diplomatic resolution of the situation in Ukraine. Now, Putin made it pretty clear that they're going to achieve their objectives, as the Russians have consistently stated. They will achieve their objectives, whether it's through the diplomatic means or through the military means. And on that, Putin had a meeting with relevant military leaders on Saturday, I believe it was, which was to receive a full report on the status of the various initiatives going on the battlefront. And as you may have seen, Putin was in full military gear, which he's done a couple of times in the recent period. But the obvious, he did this meeting directly before the meeting in Mar-a-Lago, with clearly very clear message being delivered. Now, what we've had on the battlefield, where Putin heard the reports from the commanders of the center and east forces on the progress of the mission, we've had the towns of Dmitriov in Donetsk and Gulyapolya in the Zaporizhia region, which they describe as liberated. Gulyapolya, just to note, it is the second largest city in Zaporizhia, so that clearly means something for the offensives underway and on the battlefields, on the military front. I'll just read what Putin said in the publicly recorded part of the meeting that he had with military generals or commanders on the ground. He said, "Now we see that intelligent people have also emerged in the West who are recommending that the Kiev authorities accept decent terms for ending the conflict and are offering good basic conditions for ensuring Ukraine's long-term security, conditions for restoring relations with the Russian Federation, and restoring Ukraine's economy. But we see that even today, unfortunately, the leaders of the Kiev regime are in no hurry to resolve this conflict peacefully. I spoke about this a year ago, speaking at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is where he laid out Russia's core concerns. He says, but today, Putin went on to say, judging by your reports, judging by the pace we are seeing along the line of contact, our interest in withdrawing Ukrainian military formations from the territories they currently occupy is essentially zero. for completely different reasons. And if the Kiev authorities are unwilling to resolve this peacefully, we will resolve all the issues facing us through a special military operation by force. So that's fairly clear from Vladimir Putin. And again, in military garb, I think it makes the point clear. Now, as I mentioned, Trump, and as Ushakov mentioned, Trump apparently has stated that he understands that a temporary ceasefire will not function. That, as the Russians have made clear, is only to rearm and refit and get a little rest to continue the strategic defeat of Russia, as the European crowd have made clear. Now, what Trump said on the matter of the ceasefire, he said that's one of the points we're working on right now. No, not a ceasefire. Putin, feels that, look, they're fighting and to stop, and then if they have to start again, which is a possibility, he doesn't want to be in that position. I understand that position. So that's what Trump told reporters following his meeting with Zelensky, and clearly informed by the prior discussion that he had with Putin. That is, the prior discussion before the meeting with Zelensky in Lago. Now, the other thing that Trump mentioned is the importance of ultimately the long-term resolution of what can be called the crisis in Ukraine, but which is a broader geopolitical conflict, not only against Russia and China, but against the BRICS dynamic in general. But what Trump did say is that resuming trade with Russia would open up great opportunities for both nations. He said, we, the U.S. and Russia, weren't able to trade very much or any of that, which was a shame because, a lot of success could have been had by trading with Russia. They have great land, great minerals and other things, and we have things they want very badly, which Trump made these comments following the meeting with Zelensky. Now, as you may know, if you've heard any of the broadcasts on this channel of the LaRouche organization, we have a long-standing program that Lyndon and Helga Tsepp-LaRouche have promoted over the last basically half century, which is to build the Bering Strait connection, which would be a tunnel at this point, which is something that Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, as well as the special, envoy for peace negotiations with the Americans, Kirill Dmitriev has mentioned this. He calls it the Putin-Trump tunnel. It was previously known in the Kennedy era as the Kennedy-Khrushchev World Peace Bridge. So it's an idea that's been around for a long time, but clearly one that needs to be built now. Now, this is not just for getting natural gas and oil and minerals through a tunnel under the Bering Strait. This would ultimately open up the United States to collaborate immediately with Russia, but ultimately with the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and to create the World Land Bridge, as Lyndon and Helga Tsepp-LaRouche have promoted all along. Whenever they've pushed the Bering Strait connection, it's from that standpoint that you could ultimately connect all nations on the planet through development corridors extending from the southern tip of Africa up through the Eurasian landmass, all the way down through North America to the tip of South America. And that's what needs to happen ultimately for peace. Now, just on terms of some of Trump's present position, I think it's notable to cite the statements from Leonid Slutsky, chairman of the Committee of International Affairs of the Russia State Duma and the leader of one of the political parties there. He has been strident in his views that warning of the dangers of World War III, which is correct warnings. He said yesterday to TASS, I think we have already passed the point of no return between peace and war when there was a threat of a confrontation between the two largest nuclear powers, what we saw during the Biden administration. Now, step by step and small steps, I would say, things are returning to common sense, to balanced interaction on all of the most difficult dossiers, cases, and issues. Slutsky went on to say, we will spare no effort for that. It is important to do everything possible so that the 21st century doesn't become the last in human history. So that is important. And as far as other statements from the Russians, Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, was asked about the U.S. national security strategy, which reduces the sort of strategic confrontation approach with Russia. Lavrov responded that he said it's worth mentioning the fact that the strategy does not contain any calls to subject our country to a system-wide containment and deterrence policy. It may be the first time the U.S. to publicly question NATO's long-standing commitment to expansionism, even if it stops short of undertaking not to expand NATO. Now, he went on to say, effectively, we'll see what actually happens instead of statements. But he also said that went against the war hawks of the European Union and Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, as well as Starmer of the UK. He says, I hope they get to read this interview. Should anyone consider attacking Russia, they would face a devastating blow. So clearly the Russians are aware that the warmongers are still afoot and, are clear that it's important what's happening with the U.S., but they understand the pressures. Now, as Helga Tsepp-LaRouche said, and as the lead of today's Daily Alert says, hopeful steps toward ending war in Ukraine, but will we dismantle the global war policy? And it cites, of course, Helga Tsepp-LaRouche's long-standing principle that you need a new security and development architecture for the entire planet. Only resolving that will stop the other war fronts from popping up. That was a similar point made by Diane Sayre, who you may know from these broadcasts and otherwise as a former candidate for U.S. Senate in New York. And perhaps you'll hear more from her in the coming period. But she gave a live 5-minute interview to RT International on Saturday to their from their Moscow bureau, where she made effectively the same point. You've got to have a new development and security architecture for the whole planet, to which the interviewer exclaimed, that's an intriguing idea, one that would be accepted by many nations on this planet, and is the core of the new paradigm of the BRICS and other multilateral polyphonic, as Vladimir Putin has said, that that these nations would accept this approach. Now, on the matter of the flare-up in different parts of the world, certainly today's meeting that between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel would be one of those potential flare-ups. We'll have to see what happens. There's certain analysts, such as Alistair Crook, an important voice, former diplomat and MI6 from the UK. He has asserted that there's a kind of buyer's remorse coming from the Israel First crowd, the likes of Miriam Adelson, who put in lots of money into the Trump administration, and perhaps given that Trump hasn't given them everything they wanted, that there's a kind of buyer's remorse. We'll have to see where all of that stands. But there's also a report in Axios saying that that Trump's team no longer trusts Netanyahu, citing people like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Susie Wiles, Kushner, Witkoff, that they're upset with what's going on with Netanyahu. The article says, quoting these U.S. officials unnamed, the only one he has left is the president who still likes him, that is Netanyahu, but even he wants to see the Gaza deal moving faster than it is right now. Now, these kind of reports can often be a way to just put pressure on the Trump administration to keep the geopolitical vision alive of the British using their proxy in Israel. so, it's speculative in terms of how clear or how much there is dissension within the Trump administration. But, this is it would be pressure by the Israel First crowd, such as Adelson, Bill Ackman, some of these types. And of course, they don't really care about Israel. They are not putting the interests of that nation in mind. They are effectively using it as like it's Ukraine has been used as a kind of geopolitical battering ram, and the maintenance of the divide and conquer strategy that we've seen since the clean breaks policy of the neocons, or its previous precedent of the Bernard Lewis plan, a British agent if I ever saw one. Now, just briefly on a couple of last matters on the Taiwan situation, which is not really Taiwan, but is the containment of China, or those that would like to see a war directly with China. One of the areas that could pop up in terms of geopolitical hotspots. It should be noted that China has conducted live fire drills near the Strait of Taiwan, or near Taiwan. And that Lavrov has basically said that, again, the foreign minister of Russia, that they'll back up China in this. They said that Lavrov said that the Taiwan problem is an internal affair. Beijing has every right to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and then says that the Taiwan is being used as a tool of military strategic deterrence, and recalled that Moscow and Beijing in 2001 signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, which has mutual support in defending national unity and territorial integrity. So this should calm the saber rattling that we've seen from Japan and those within the neocon persuasion in the United States that would like to use Taiwan as to get some kind of conflict going with China. So now, again, just to come back to it, none of these crisis points can be solved on a one-to-one basis. It has to be addressed from the top, from a new development and security architecture for the entire planet, as Helmut LaRouche has maintained. So that's what we have to mobilize for. That's what we will be doing at the LaRouche Organization and the Executive Intelligence Review. So stay tuned to those channels for your daily updates, and we'll provide more